Okay. And so we are just hitting 10 o'clock. We are about to get started. I'm assuming what I see in front of me is what everybody is seeing, but I don't know. We've got about, how many people logged in already? We've got about 60 people here. And so there we go. Thank you. And did you want to pin me? Am I pinned in the IB? Am I pinned on the?
I have pinned you.
Okay, great. I can't see that. I should probably, I don't know why. Okay. And looks like people have figured that out. And so let's get going here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our CSJ Blue Community and Water First conversation. I'm Paul Baines. I am the Blue Community Coordinator. I've been for a couple of years, and I'm looking forward to today's event to engage you all through the ways that we have available on the issue of drinking water and access to drinking water on First Nations reserves in Canada. We've got a beautiful program lined up for you today. We're going to go until about 11:30, and we're going to open with a prayer and close with a ceremony. I'm not the only face you will see today. There's several of us here, including two members from the Blue Community Steering Committee. And so that's who I am. And if you'd like to use the chat box to introduce yourself and maybe the watershed that you're part of, you can do so now, or you can do that throughout the event itself. So that's who I am. I'm Paul Baines. We are here to make connections between the CSJ Blue Community Project, which protects water as a human right, a shared commons, and a sacred gift, with an organization called Water First, which you'll hear more about today. The format of today will be myself and, again, members from the steering committee doing an opening and closing prayer, Sister Nancy Sullivan, who will introduce John Millar from the Water First organization. And throughout the event, we encourage you to use the chat box for your reflections and questions. Questions are actually best put in the Q&A, the question and answer box that you have available as well. That'll help us sort through and moderate that section for the last half an hour of our program, which is to invite your questions and reflections on this issue of pressing concern regarding the drinking water crisis on First Nations reserves. And so that's going to be our format for today until 11:30. And probably by this point in the pandemic, most of us are familiar with Zoom. You've probably figured out by now that your video and audio are not engaged, but there will be different panelists showing up for audio and video. Your role today is mostly as a witness, and then in the last half an hour to use those chat box, like I mentioned. And I want to thank IB today for helping in the background with this communications technology. We'll try to make it as smooth as possible for you. Please try to adjust your volume or the way in which you've got your setup for yourself so you can maximize today. And if you want we are recording this today as well. And if you'd like access to the video we're going to show, we'll put that link of the video in the chat box as well. I wanted to start my opening here also with a land and water acknowledgement. I am part of the European settlement of these Mississauga Anishinaabeg lands and waters, who are part of the Anishinaabeg Nation. Canada has treaties with this nation, and for this part, it's Treaty 20, which is part of the Williams Treaty. I'm grateful to live and be enlivened by these lands and waters, specifically the Anishinaabe, which I live next to, also known as the Atanabe. I commit to healing these broken relationships with this place and with the Anishinaabe. And if you haven't already, you can introduce yourself in the chat box so we can get a sense of who's gathering here today. And again, if you'd like to sort of acknowledge the lands or waters where you live, that's great as well. I'm going to pass it over to Sister Cecily Hewitt, who's also part of the Blue Community Steering Committee for our opening prayer.
It's off. I welcome you also. And this morning, for our beginning prayer, I would ask you just to take your glass of water and just hold it, please, while I pray our opening prayer. Now, our opening prayer is actually a poem written by Ian Williams, and it's in Northern Lights, which is a book from Novalis. And so I would ask you at this point to come to quiet, recognizing that we are all linked through the water, as well as with God's blessing. And loving God, in this kingdom of ice, which we have today, your grace shines through the spring and the winter sun. The sun gives us the first warmth, the eternal warmth, and eventually changes ice to the water of life. Please do the same, dear Lord, with our hearts. Melt hardness, coldness, and fear within us. Transform us to be kind, warm, and loving. Let the drinking water from the melting icicles remind us of our baptismal water. Let your waters nourish us and replenish us. Splash us with the waters of justice. Splash us with the waters of beauty. Splash us with the waters of hope. Awaken and restore us so that we can bloom. Amen.
We'll turn it over to Nancy now. Thank you, Sister Cecily.
Well, it's my privilege to introduce Water First and John Millar. Water First Education and Training Incorporated helps address water challenges in Indigenous communities in Canada through education, training, and meaningful collaboration. Now, Water First began in 2009 to bring drinking water resources to rural schools in Uganda. But then people began to say to Water First in Canada, what about the deplorable water conditions in First Nations communities? So since 2012, Water First has been working with First Nations communities in Canada, and to date has collaborated with First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis communities in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Labrador to address water challenges through education and training. And I think what sets Water First apart from other organizations is the approach that they take. So it is their approach that sets them apart, which has led to successful partnership and strong community uptake of their programs. And so there's three things that are important for their approach. One is that they have meaningful collaboration and respectful relationships. Secondly, they hire and train locally. And third, they blend traditional knowledge and Western science. A few years ago, the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada had an integral ecology fund and decided to give some of its resources to Water First for just one of its many projects. And that was the project of training interns on to be water specialists in their community. Now, behind every well-run organization, there's a well-run team with good leadership. And the leader of Water First is also the founder, John Millar. From what I've seen of John over these past few years, he epitomizes the values that are so important to the Sisters of St. Joseph and our associates and companions. He seeks meaningful collaboration and respectful relationships. John has a lovely wife who's a teacher. He has two fine sons. He lives in Creemore, Ontario. He enjoys reading and playing hockey And on any on any winter day, you can find him in his backyard skating on his skating rink. And so without further ado, I introduce John Millar.
Thank you so much, Sister Nancy. That was very kind. And I hope I'm coming through okay. I'm unmuted, and I think we're good to go. I'd like to offer a number of thanks. Thanks so much to the CSJ Blue community for this awesome opportunity. Thank you, Paul, for your organizational efforts over the last number of weeks and helping to bring us all together. Ibrahim, for your tech support and the dry run that we did the other day to make sure things were working. And of course, to the Sisters of St. Joseph for their incredible support that has made a lot of things possible here at Water First and our programs. I'd like to start with a brief video, and I'll set it up just briefly with an introduction in that it's an announcement of a new partnership that in part has been made possible through the Sisters of St. Joseph. It includes some of the voices and perspectives of the young trainees from the Indigenous communities that we partner with, and some community members and leaders as well. I think we can all expect that the executive director of an organization would suggest that the work is important that they're doing and so on. And I think it's important, of course, to hear from the community members themselves about the work that we do and the role it plays in communities and in the lives of the individuals that we work with. So Ibrahim, if it's okay, I'm ready for that video to roll whenever you're good to go.
It's a good program. Teach you a lot about what a community needs for clean water.
Being a single parent and raising a child is financially difficult, and I probably wouldn't have completed the internship successfully if it wasn't for that support from Water First.
The internship is designed to create long-term skilled people in the communities who can maintain clean drinking water supply for the future.
I just want to make sure it's healthy. It's my community. It's where I come from. I take pride in what I do. Getting into this internship, to be honest, I didn't know what I was signing up for. I came in here for a job and I ended here with a career. My family's set from this. Having this for my son and I is the best thing.
As a largely non-Indigenous organization, we look to our First Nations Advisory Council for strategic advice on how to effectively collaborate with partners and design and deliver our programs in the community.
First Nations Advisory Council is a space where we come as practitioners and ask a lot of questions about how do we tackle X, Y, and Z in ways that make sense to the participating communities.
I support them because of the work that they do. I've seen the relationships that they've established with the communities, and they're very respectful relationships, and they're reciprocal relationships.
Working with our partners, we offer a 15-month paid internship for young Indigenous adults who can start a career in water operations. Currently, 8 out of the 10 graduates from our last internship are still working in drinking water plants. 2 of the other graduates are now returning to school and pursuing additional studies in environmental science. After graduating from the drinking water internship, our interns are welcomed into the Alumni Network. This is an opportunity for our alumni to continue building professional and career relationships and receive additional training put on by both Water First and our partners.
Knowing that we're no longer a Mumbo water browser anymore, we don't have to drink out of bottles. You know, it's gonna be huge for us.
The internship is awesome. Commit to it and everything will fall into place.
We wouldn't be here today as an organization, and particularly with the internship program, if we didn't have the support of those donors. Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. I think I'm coming through again, good. And so I'd like to follow that up by offering a few perspectives. Sister Nancy, you covered some of the key elements of what we do and how we do it. And I'd like to offer a few more perspectives, some of which just come from listening to our community partners. And Ibrahim, I'm not sure if I'm a thumbnail or if I'm pinned now. I don't know, but just a heads up, I may be a small square at the moment. It is on my screen, but I'll keep going. And that okay, great, thank you. There was actually one of our community partners. And a leader in the community who offered this perspective to me that was really quite an important aha moment in understanding our role as practitioners in this space, and that it was quite simple. I was told that one of the key things that we do differently is that we support communities to put bums in seats for the actual trainings, and put differently, training, education, that is a capacity development initiative. And at the same time, I think done well, this approach includes lending capacity to communities so that they can effectively host a program like the one that we offer. It comes from the realization and acceptance that actually outside programs like Water First, even with the best intentions, can be an imposition on communities who are already swamped, who are already have certainly not all, but many communities are busy, engaging with the day-to-day events of running a community. They have a lot to do already. At times they're putting out pressing fires, and when an outside organization comes to the table and offers paid training positions and so on, of course that is often, and it's certainly in our experience, virtually every time it's very welcome. But at the same time, we need to understand that that is also an imposition on the capacity, existing capacity of the communities. So that's one of the ways where we understood, and it was in that one conversation with the community leader, it was like, wow, I hadn't really realized that was a big piece of what we do. And those community members who are often, they're swamped, they're putting out other fires, They care about the program. They just have a whole bunch of different priorities at the same time. So to lend capacity, and one of the ways that we do that is to support the communities to identify the trainees. And that involves a very comprehensive recruitment effort where we're not sort of saddling the communities on their own to identify who the candidates may be for the training program. We get down on the ground. We are literally knocking on doors at times, working on the ground with our community partners. We will engage with the education directors who often know all the the youth in the communities who may be interested and well positioned for a technical training position like this. Will, with the community's permission, monitor the applicants that are coming in, and through having conversations, we'll understand who has applied. Have some really key people in the community, are they aware of the opportunity, and so on. And that actually takes months of work, of getting to know the communities, getting to know the leaders, getting to know the young people, getting to know the people who work with young people, in order to just situate the program, the recruitment effort in a very positive way. So that, it comes, and those lessons, they've been learned in some ways the hard way, as an outside organization, as a largely non-Indigenous organization, engaging and trying to do things differently. Sometimes you're just required to try stuff and see what works and see where the challenges are too. But in many ways, it's also come in a relatively easy way of learning, in that we take the time and try and make sure that this is happening at every opportunity, to engage with our First Nations community partners in a few ways. One is through our First Nations Advisory Council, which is an important part of how we do what we do. We come to that advisory council, as was saying in the video, fairly honestly, and say we're pretty good with water science and education and training, but none of us have grown up in a Northern First Nation. And how do we bring that expertise to the community level in a way that makes the most sense for communities and community members? So asking those questions honestly, and understanding where our ignorance is and where our expertise is really key. And also throughout the implementation of a program, to really make sure that we are actively collaborating in a meaningful way with our partners. And so that means making a lot of the bigger decisions together, and ensuring that there's buy-in along the way for how we're doing what we're doing together. It's actually quite critical. We also, like, through the sort of bums and seats lesson, it's also ensuring that it's not a sink or swim mentality that is underpinning the trainings. It's really important that it's another way that we sort of kind of complement the existing services that are out there. If a young Indigenous participant in the program fails the exam, unfortunately, in some contexts, that means they're like, that's the end of the road. That's not our approach. We actually will dig deeper and try harder to support those individuals that aren't successful in their first exam and certification attempts. That just means we've got more work to do, and we need to work harder. So there's group sessions and group trainings, but there's also one-on-one tutorials where if an individual, if they identify that, like, hey, I want to try that again, I'm not done, then we're not done either. And we will roll up our sleeves, and literally, not in COVID times, but in other times, it's elbow to elbow, with notepads and pens and paper to understand, is it the mathematics, is it the chemistry, is it where are the challenges, and how do we support this individual to have a more successful attempt? It's these things that sort of added together, they really inform how we do what we do. And by following these principles and these guidelines, we're very fortunate in that we see results that have been really encouraging, and have been. I don't want to be too boastful, but I don't want to be too shy about it either. Like we have broken some ground in a training realm. Indigenous Services asked me to come and speak to Indigenous Services staff in Ottawa a couple of years ago after we had our successful pilot on Manitoulin, and they asked me to share the secrets of our success, which we try not to be secretive about, in how can Indigenous services learn from some of the training successes that we're having. And so I think what we're doing and the results that we're seeing are quite unique. I'll give some examples in Manitoulin, which was during that project when Water first became involved with the Sisters of St. Joseph. It was through that project in partnership with all 7 First Nations on Manitoulin. We saw 9 out of 10 trainees who graduated the program with an operator and training certification, a water quality analyst certification, usually both. Everyone received some sort of industry certification, and 9 out of 10 trainees were employed within weeks of graduating. I think it's a really important pairing when we see that kind of uptake right away. It's a very important pairing of the community demand. It's just kind of supply demand if you look at it with that lens. There's a very strong demand at the community level for young Indigenous individuals that have those skills. And upon graduation, they are very much more often than not snapped up quite quickly. We then, to build on the successes of that pilot, we've been working with 11 First Nations associated with the Bomose Tribal Council in Northwestern Ontario, was referred to in the video. And it was really great to see that we had 14 young interns write their operator and training exams just at the tail end of 2020. 11 out of those 14 trainees have passed their operator and training exams. 10 out of the 14 passed at their first crack, their first at bat. Doesn't always go that way. I'll be honest. The pass rates of the first exam have been historically a lot humbler. But these young Indigenous adults worked their tails off and rolled up their sleeves and really applied themselves. And they see this opportunity and have certainly run with it. So hats off to their hard work and dedication. Added to that, and the Wabnung internship that was a part of the video also. We're in this just fantastic position to do the internship, which is a larger program working with multiple communities simultaneously, to do it a third time. And it's just fantastic to know that this program isn't on a shelf waiting to be delivered again. We are the model here is that we will ensure that the Wabnung partnership starts. Actually, it's looking like it'll overlap with the implementation of the Bomose internship. And I'd like to briefly just end on speaking about that context, in that Canadians care about this issue, and we're very fortunate in that a lot of those Canadians who do care about this issue have chosen to donate to Water First, including the Sisters of St. Joseph. We've seen significant growth, and a part of the result of that growth and Canadians caring about this is that we are now, with the Wabnung internship, able to fund that project largely independently. Whereas previously we have had to wait between the successful Manitoulin pilot and the Bomose second program of the water treatment training. We had to wait 18 months for the funding to line up. So we had staff ready to go, we had willing host communities ready to go, and we had to wait for 1.5 years to line up all the pieces to go. The program sat on a shelf. We don't have to do that anymore, in part thanks to the Sisters of St. Joseph and thousands of Canadians that have been donating to Water First to see these programs move and get out to the communities where they should be. So we're just thrilled about how that the principles are aligning with the First Nations interest in hosting our program, with Canadians caring about this issue, and just everything is coming together in a meaningful way, where we're seeing young Indigenous adults come out of the program able to support their communities and start their careers in water management. It's really awesome. So I'll end on that, and Paul, over to you.
Thanks so much, John, for telling us firsthand. It's so, without having face-to-face events these days during the pandemic, it's just nice to have some direct communication. I think we've all seen a lot of, emails and websites and whatever. So it's just nice to have your attention shared with us and go directly into our computers. This part of the program is going to just feature John and I. I got a couple of questions for John. And I'm also seeing some questions coming into the Q&A box. And so I will moderate and facilitate that in about 15 or 25 minutes or so. And there's been some questions regarding access to the video. And so I put it in the Q&A thing, but I also just put it in the chat box as well. If you'd like to watch that short video that we screened at the beginning of the program, please don't watch it right now, but wait until the end and watch it again. And again, share it amongst your networks as well. It's really well done. And again, puts a human face on these news issues that we've probably been reading about. And so at this point, it was going to have there's been some learning around how to get the right faces in the right boxes. So I had a couple of questions for John, just to just open us up as a way to also then invite your own questions. And thanks again for people who are using the chat box and also using the question and answer box. So John, part of the motivation for this not only was to celebrate what Water First was doing, but it does seem as if, we see the headlines, some Canadians might even be confused about why the federal government is even responsible for providing many services to First Nations, including clean drinking water. Can you help us understand this water responsibility and the financial and the political challenges for meeting this basic human right? I mean, we should acknowledge that 10 years ago, the federal government, Canada, committed to the human right to water and sanitation through a United Nations declaration. And so I think there's still some confusion for some or over like, what is this relationship really about between the federal government and First Nations when it comes to water? And why does it seem so challenging?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so challenging?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, absolutely. So I'll speak to that historical relationship and first about how, why is it that the federal government is responsible for providing some of these services? And I'm not a historian, and at the same time, I am fortunate in that I get to speak to some individuals who are quite knowledgeable about these things from time to time. I will say that an Indigenous member of our board some time ago shared with me, just kind of unpacked from their perspective how this works, and it's this way. A long time ago, through treaties and agreements between the Government of Canada and Indigenous communities across the lands here, they agreed in exchange for the top half of North America to offer education services, healthcare, water, housing, and so on. And those things were very much written into the treaties and agreements between the Government of Canada and Indigenous communities across the land. It's much more complex than that. There are some areas of the country where treaties apply. There are others where they don't. But that's basically it. I mean, we made a deal a long time ago in exchange for control of the top half of North America. It was a pretty good deal. We would provide these services to the communities that were already here. Right. Unfortunately, you spoke about that UN declaration and Canada's support for that. What we have seen is that successive governments over the many decades have not lived up to their obligations in those treaties. There have been so many instances of backtracking on those commitments, of just outright avoiding those commitments, diminishing those commitments, and on and on. And that has been happening for many decades. I'm happy to say that it appears as though the current federal Liberals are departing from that tradition in some respects. But it's not for me to say whether that's adequate or successful or to the satisfaction of First Nations communities and Indigenous communities in Canada. I offer that as an armchair observation only, that there appears to be some deviation from the norm with our current federal government. But yeah, it is challenging. It has been a long, deplorable history, and another piece that I'd offer on this question is that, and this is just common sense, I think, is that actions speak louder than words. So yes, we signed on to a declaration, a decade ago that is relevant to this context of drinking water in First Nations communities. We didn't have a government in power at that time that took that very seriously, and that was not a departure from successive governments that led up to that. There's progress being made. There's a lot of progress yet to be achieved. There's a long way to go. But those are my initial thoughts on that question, Paul.
Wonderful, thanks you. And if you've got if anybody has any follow-up questions on that thread, please let us know, and we've got some time to get your questions answered and reflections honored. You know, I just read last night, John, that several First Nations are taking the government to court
Yes.
because this is, as you said, it's been multiple governments over decades. And as we saw just a few weeks or months ago, that the March deadline for ending the drinking water advisories isn't going to end as promised, that they're going to need more time and more money. But maybe actually what I don't think I've heard, and maybe others would find useful, that there's like 3 categories for the drinking water advisories thing, the do not boil, do not consume. Could you just let us learn a little bit more about what does it mean for, like, what do they mean by these long-term? Because there's long-term and there's short-term, and then there's 3 different kinds, isn't there, of an advisory? Maybe just briefly on that, if you could.
Sure. And I would narrow it down even further, just for the sake of this discussion, to 2, to like a boil water advisory and do not consume. Boil water advisory means that there's there would be, for example, organic contaminants in the water that will be neutralized through the boiling process, right? We're all fairly familiar with that. You can boil your water for a minute, and you can generally safely drink that water after it's boiled for a minute. Let it cool down, of course, and you're good to go. Do not consume advisories are often they include, and for example, inorganic contaminants like mercury. And so if mercury is in that water, you're not going to boil it out. You're not going to neutralize the contaminant through a boiling process. So you literally cannot consume that water, even if you have neutralized the organic contaminants through boiling. There's still mercury in it, and it is a very difficult treatment process to get out heavy metals and neurotoxins like mercury. So that's that's a kind of a high level way of looking at it, and it's kind of comes down to the extent of the contamination. If the extent is organic and fairly mild in concentration, boiling for a minute would take care of it. If it's much more problematic than that, as I'm saying, neurotoxins and heavy metals, there's no boiling process that is going to deal with that, and you can't consume it. You shouldn't even be washing your hands with it.
Mm. And there is a distinction between, for the federal government at least, between, we hear a lot about long-term advisories, whereas some communities are on these, I guess, on and off.
Yes.
Can you help make a distinction? Because when in the news, it's often about the long-term advisories. Can you help us understand a bit further regarding the difference between the two, and why that's either useful or not so useful for this issue?
Yes, the long-term boil water advisories, they of course, the most extreme example in Nescandiga, Ontario, is a community that's been on a boil water advisory for 25 years straight, right? So the longer term ones are meant to capture communities who have been on a sustained boil water advisory, I believe it's for over a year. And if the short term ones, for instance, are not a part of the dialogue anyway, around addressing boil water advisories in First Nations communities in Canada by a certain date, the original date being the end of March this year, and a 5-year time span to accomplish that. That is referring to the long-term boil water advisories. It excludes, and I think it should also very much be a priority. Water First does, and I know our community partners would feel the same way. It should be very much the same priority to focus on short-term boil water advisories, and not once long-term boil water advisories are hopefully adequately addressed, that we don't stop there. The short-term ones mean a lot too. Short-term is, if the community is kind of on and off from a boil water advisory for 6 months, and then the boil water advisory is lifted for a couple months, and then they're back on a boil water advisory for a year, and then it's lifted for a year, and it's just sort of back and forth. What I've seen in that context in my visits to communities affected by that reality is that there is zero trust for the water system. If it keeps going on and off of boil water advisory, it's just human nature to not trust that. The track record is not sufficient for trust, right? And so I think, again, with that lens, it's short-term boil water advisories are every much as important, and not to, of course, diminish 25 years at Niskandiga is absolutely mind-blowing and ridiculous. Yes, that is an incredible priority, but let's not forget about the communities as well that have on and off challenges and ultimately zero trust in their drinking water source.
Thank you. That's great to know about more. And I think, yeah, a lot of Canadians, even who have access to drinking water, don't necessarily always trust the water. And, we've got to learn a lot more to learn about where our water is coming from and how it's treated and how we're investing in public water systems. My second question is, and I'm seeing some questions come in, so thanks everybody. I did put a link into the chat box regarding a blog post I made a while ago regarding this issue of drinking water advisories, if you're looking for some more information and some maps. But my question here, John, is, just 3 of the modern Catholic social teachings include, life and dignity of the human person, participation in the decision-making processes that affect us, and advancing people's rights and responsibilities. Can you speak about how Water First has seen these teachings in action while working on drinking water access and First Nations reserves?
Sure, and it's very interesting in that those teachings immediately make me think of what we refer to as our strands at Water First, and I'm sure you'll see there's a lot of linkages. A little while back, we tried to figure out, as an organization experiencing significant growth, how do we grow well? How do we grow in a way where we're partnering with more Indigenous communities who are asking to host our services, while not losing the sort of the small shop feel that I think has a lot to do with some of the successes that we're having. And so these strands, for the Water First strands, which are really just woven into everything we do, and it's the kind of underpinnings of how we do what we do, they include trust building, meaningful partnerships, and lasting results. And the trust building, of course, is recognizing the histories between our peoples, and the deplorable history really between Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous Canada, the rest of Canada. There's unbelievable history there that we should all be taking the time to educate ourselves about. So we acknowledge, like, right out of the gates, okay, we are a largely non-Indigenous organization that is engaging with First Nations communities, and whether we like it or not, we're bringing that part of that identity and a part of that history to the table when we sit down with our partners. So just ensuring that we're acknowledging that, and recognizing that building trust is a really important piece of what we do and how we do it. Meaningful partnerships. I was referring to this earlier, where just that collaborative element, that the very important elements of the program, and indeed ongoing throughout the implementation of a partnership together, we are making the big decisions and the many small ones together. And just ensuring that we're on the same page, and that partnership is meaningful and not tokenistic, means a ton to us. I think our community partners, and it has a lot to do with the successes that we have. And the lasting results is a focus on the sustainability of what we do, and I think trying to keep our lens and channeling our resources through education and training, so that the beauty of observing these programs over the years has included watching the young graduates just sort of take off upon graduation. And again, coming back to that sort of supply-demand dynamic, if we're supporting the provision of a you know, the skills in a young individual, who, and the community very much needs that young individual, it takes off, and we don't have to keep pumping the tires of that program when we get that supply-demand dynamic right. And so it's just fantastic for the lasting results. We are very much in touch with the graduates of our programs, but they are, you know, very much the norm is certainly they are off to the races upon graduation. And it's a commitment to the sustainability of that kind of initiative, where it is self-sustaining. Those individuals, they have these credentials, no one can take them away. And the communities benefit by having young Indigenous adults with these skills, credentials, and experiences in the community. So, as you know, as you mentioned, there's those teachings that you just described. There's great linkages between the philosophy of our work as well.
Thank you. I did attend you had like an event, I think 2 months ago or so online, when you had this announcement, I guess, regarding this new phase. And, you know, you featured many of the voices of the interns themselves. And just in today's short video clip, you know, it's a very moving spot of the young women getting emotional talking about this. And so I find often this issue is about numbers and about dollars and about how many years, but I feel like the human dignity piece and the ability to play an active role in a solution that you've mostly, you know, to play an active role in a problem you've mostly been erased from. I see how this program lets people, you know, just build power, but also see how access to water and the trust issue you've already talked about, it's just opens up so much more regarding people feeling valued, people feeling seen, people feeling like they're a part of and they belong, and that people are listening. And so I feel like that dignity piece and that empowerment piece is part of the science, that's part of the training, maybe not directly, but definitely that's what gets seen in the videos, and that's what I heard in the event a few months ago. Anything else just to add to that in terms of just how this is not just about changing water, but changing lives?
I think there's some really interesting kind of offshoots or byproducts of the programs that have surprised us that you know, you just kind of reminded me of in terms of that dignity and coming back to our sort of second strand of meaningful partnerships. You know, it's also really important to understand that the partners and Water First are training the young Indigenous adults that we engage with on water and water management and water science, water chemistry, the history of water, and so on. And so that includes ensuring that our partner communities know, and that we're active about making sure to invite local elders, knowledge keepers, you know, water ceremony experts at the local community level to participate in our programs. We are educating together. The partners are educating the young Indigenous participants. That includes Western water science, but it also includes local traditional knowledge. Absolutely. And as a non-Indigenous organization, you know, of course, we do not at all implement those traditional teachings. We're not qualified to, but we ensure that the phone is picked up and that the effort is made to make those connections and to extend the invitations and to ensure that just everyone's welcome in that space. So it's not just kind of like this outside lens of Western water science that is in that classroom. So, you know, I'd say that's another piece of it that has been really cool to see. A lot of the graduates of the program speak about the importance of that sort of unexpected benefit through the program as being becoming better acquainted with community elders, with traditional perspectives on water. And we've seen, you know, just some really interesting developments there and acknowledged in particular by the participants themselves. Other ways have been neat in that we work with the drinking water program in particular with multiple First Nations simultaneously, usually at the tribal council level. You know, the tribal councils we've engaged with have a number of member communities, anywhere between 6 and 11 associated with the tribal council. It's also been really interesting to see this sort of the relationships develop between community members and the young trainees that then know individuals and become pretty fast friends with the individuals from, you know, half a dozen to 11 different communities in their region. And that's been a pretty cool way to just see some of the connectivity that comes, professional network building, all these different kinds of things. It's been neat to see when we're often focused on, okay, there's water science behind this certification. We need to work on those elements of to get, you know, to help the young participant pass an exam. But there's so much more to it than that. That's been really refreshing to see over the years.
Thank you. I had a third question, but I'm going to put a pause on that because there's a few questions, I think, from our audience I'd love to for you to address. Some of them are probably shorter answers and some of them are maybe longer answers. I'll try to moderate this as best I can in the order that I think maybe makes more sense to me. Some of the questions are regarding, like, do the graduates, you know, do some of the graduates actually get work or intern or follow-up work with their community, or what is the relationship between where they're trained and what options they have available? Obviously, there's a lot of factors in the works here, but there's some questions regarding the ability or opportunity for the graduates to be working in their home communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen a lot of uptake among the participating communities to employ the local graduates. It certainly doesn't happen every time, but I would say it happens most of the time. I sort of bring it back to that supply-demand dynamic, and there's a principle behind that that is overarching, and that is to just ensure that, you know, unfortunately there are a lot of challenges at the community level in numerous Indigenous communities when it comes to drinking water. We offer a service that is focused on one element of that, and it's a training service. It's not a fix a water treatment plant program. It's you know, we're not pulling out a faulty filtration system and replacing it. We are training young Indigenous adults to have and obtain the entry-level certifications to work in the field and to you know, ultimately be a part of that operations and maintenance. A piece of that then is to ensure that when we're engaging with new community partners, is to understand that we're defining the problem in a similar way. I use the crude example from time to time. Like a shovel is a very useful tool, but it won't fix a car. It'll actually make it worse. And so we need to ensure that we're bringing the right tool to the right challenge. And in this respect, we bring a training program to communities that have challenges that training will solve. And so that's a really critical thing for us to align right at the gates. It sounds kind of obvious, but there's such a long list of water challenges in many communities. We need to make sure that we're aligned on that one central one. And when we do that successfully, and we have, you know, in many instances, then we see that supply demand work out very well. And back to the question is that, well, you know, are the interns hired locally? Again, most are. And it's because we're taking the time to ensure that the community has challenges, water challenges that training will solve. And if we line that up well, then the participants are needed by the community and often snapped up upon graduation.
Thank you. There's two similar questions from Elaine Cole and Sister McClellan. You know, is the government, and maybe provincial and federal, actively preventing the pollution of the waters in the area where these reserves are? And also, like, you know, where is the contaminant due to industrial negligence? Has there been any success in getting companies to clean up their mess? And so I guess, you know, you mentioned mercury earlier, and again, you've as you said, you're working with this one tool within this larger toolbox of this issue of water access. But, you know, what are your reflections? What could you tell the rest of the Canadians from your experience working on this issue? regarding the issue of water contamination and water pollution, and where's the responsibility lie in cleaning these up, or even better, how are we, preventing water to be polluted? Because, 200 years ago, these communities were just drinking the water. I mean, Ontario and Canada is full of water. It's not like we're living in a desert, right? So often the challenges are partially maybe environmental, like they're just naturally occurring, but I imagine parts of the time it's also through a legacy or an ongoing structural issue with pollution from one or more sources. And I know this isn't the shovel that Water First works on, but perhaps you and Water First have some insight into, do our current laws, are they enough to protect water's protection, or prevention, or are the laws good enough, or are there examples of companies or cities cleaning up the mess, and so that we could be all having cleaner water in the future?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad to hear like an environmentally focused question. Of course, our drinking water programs are in the spotlight these days, and at the same time, we do a lot of environmental water projects in partnership with First Nations, with a very similar approach in hiring and training locally, and supporting young Indigenous adults to obtain certification so that they can enter the water management field, which includes the environmental water resources. So, I mean, the question is huge, and it's really difficult to generalize, a yes or a no on like, are the laws adequate? And I certainly, could think of a number of community perspectives that I've learned about where they would feel the laws are not adequate. There's a lot of challenges in the North when it comes to environmental degradation of water resources and indeed other resources as well, natural resources. I think, if I can speak about it in relation to Water First work and that space in our partnerships with communities, there's a lot of interest there's a lot of interest in this type of work in the same sort of spirit, in that communities are keen to enhance local capacities to grapple with environmental water challenges, to engage meaningfully in an environmental assessment of, okay, there is a project proponent to do some mining or forestry or whatever natural resource extraction. There may be a project on the table. Capacities in communities can be overstretched, and certainly not in all, but definitely in some. So to engage meaningfully with an environmental assessment process of like, how is this project going to assess or going to impact our communities? We're striving to support that capacity at the community level, so that there is meaningful local leadership, so that there already is a lot of meaningful local leadership, but I'm referring to like the ability to or just to be able to avoid having to hire outside consultants to inform a community as to the risks or benefits and so on of a certain project. We're trying to support the enhancement of those capacities locally in First Nations communities, so that there's just an increased knowledge and skill set there to be able to grapple with some of these questions. There are many communities that have incredibly well-resourced, talented, highly skilled lands and resources offices that are doing a great job of tackling these issues. There are some communities that don't even have a lands and resources office, and they sometimes can feel as though they're being bulldozed by project proponents, natural resource projects in the region. So it's it's difficult. There's a very large spectrum there, but the environmental water space is one where we're very active, and there are similar challenges, and and we sort of bring to it that approach again of like just ensuring like, okay, are there community needs for increased skills and training in these areas, and where there are those needs, then we deliberately engage to identify young Indigenous adults to get into the field and to help train them and support them to bring their capacity to the table for their communities.
Thank you. This might be a quick, short answer, but there was a specific question from Janet Speth regarding Attawapiskat and Grassy Narrows, and I guess this is also maybe linked in with the Mercury. Has Water First worked with them, or has your expertise been asked for, or like how? Any experience with Grassy Narrows or Attawapiskat at this point?
Attawapiskat, no. We've worked in the region a little bit to the southeast. Fort Albany First Nation. We did a baseline water quality study in partnership with Fort Albany. So we're familiar with that landscape. Grassy Narrows, we have a participant in the Bomose drinking water internship. He was actually in the video at one point, who is from Grassy Narrows. So we're not directly working with Grassy Narrows, but I know that a part of that participant's motivation is having seen a number of health challenges among his family members and related to mercury poisoning, and it was certainly an inspiration and motivator for that young trainee to be engaged in this space in water resource management. So. Not directly, but yeah, we're certainly aware of those some of those challenging situations out there.
I just want to make another linkage here because Water First also does water education in schools, and you mentioned a lot about capacity. You know, this is one tool that potentially can increase other forms of capacity. I'm thinking about, you know, by doing water testing, students are not only learning, they're learning also about the state of their waters, and they're learning about who governs the waters, and they're learning about what contaminates the water, and what types of actions or is needed to politically or financially to change that situation. So I just want to give you a little bit of space to if you would like to, more linkages between what Water First is doing directly or indirectly for increasing all of our education around what's going on with the watershed, and ways in which we can individually and collectively advocate for better relationships, more capacity, better rules.
So are you kind of asking, like, you know, what can your average Canadian do, kind of thing?
Not so much. Well, with your educational program,
yes.
Have you seen linkages between that and again building capacity regarding people feeling more, and, you know, back to the social teaching regarding, you know, getting involved and participating in the decisions that affect you? You know, often, let's say the federal government might engage with band and council, but in terms of the youth or in terms of the community, just getting more involved and getting more interested and engaged and feeling more empowered and more capable of engaging in decisions that affect them regarding their connection to water, their water access, the water governance.
Yeah. No, I understand. I think so. Another area of our programs includes working with Indigenous elementary and high schools, and you know, really working with you know, the sort of next generation of water leaders. And so a part of that is to, you know, very much engage at the school level, and to support and really answer the call that community leadership has asked of us a number of times in the past, which is to, okay, that's great, you're working with, you know, some young adults right now, but what about like our youth who are in elementary and high school? Like, can we support those young individuals to get more involved in the field? So we offer in-school programs that help get you know, some great water science concepts into the classroom, and to enhance those that are already there, and to support young Indigenous students to get out on the land with a similar lens as I was describing before, where we you know, we engage with local elders, ensure that they are welcome in the classroom, welcome out into the field, and really helping to support those linkages between today's youth and traditional land use practices of the past and of the present. And it's you know, we hear that a lot, to be able to engage and support that younger group as well in the decision-making process. And we really have tried to design our programs in such a way that it fosters the leadership of those young students themselves. It's, you know, it's one thing for a bunch of adults in the room to decide what the students are going to do with their water project. It's a whole other thing if you can empower the students to decide what their priorities are, and to support them to go out and do something about it, right? So so that's the spirit of our education programs at the school level in the communities, and we've seen some great results out of that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in today. We're talking with John Millar from Water First. I'm Paul Baines from the CSJ Blue Community Project. We're spending some time today to inform ourselves and reflect on the success and failures of Canada's commitment for the human right to water and sanitation. Water First is actively trying to empower communities to to learn about how their water is treated, and they could treat it and maintain it and operate the water purification systems on their own, while also obviously connecting youth and elders. And so there's a lot of questions, few questions, John, coming in around like just exactly where you work, and there might be that might be part of on your website, but there are some questions regarding, are there any provinces or territories or areas that you work more in or less in? Can you just give us a general sense of, obviously you've only been doing this for a couple of years, and again, you sort of run these sort of 15, 20 person sort of internships, and so and their office is located in Creemore, Ontario. Can you speak about the scale or the range of the communities that you are and have been working in? There's some curiosity regarding that.
Sure. The bulk of our work has been in Ontario, partly just because that's where we got started and that's where we're based. We then started working more in Quebec. There are a number of communities there where we've done environmental projects in particular. We then went even further to the north and found ourselves in northern Quebec, northeastern Quebec, and Labrador. So we've run some education projects in Labrador. There's some technical environmental projects in the works also. We're active in northwestern Ontario, as I was saying, through the Bomose Tribal Council, which is like we fly to Winnipeg and drive back to Ontario to access the communities associated with that project. And then indeed in Manitoba, where there's more partnerships forming, and we've done some educational work in schools in Indigenous communities in Manitoba as well. It's a bit of a shame, I think, that we exist in a fairly uncrowded space, in that there's not a lot of other organizations like Water First offering these kind of services. So that we, as awareness of the organization continues to build, then the phone in the last few months has been ringing from communities in Saskatchewan, additional communities in Labrador. There's some conversations happening in Northwest Territories. And I spoke at the AFN conference a couple of years ago in Vancouver, and I'll never forget.
What does AFN stand for?
The Assembly of First Nations. And so I was asked to come and speak at their conference in Vancouver, and I'll never forget being asked by an Indigenous member of the audience during the Q&A period afterward, when are you getting started working out here? Because we have the same challenges and not a lot of options to address them. And so, unfortunately, we are in an uncrowded space. We started in Ontario, and we have been sort of incrementally moving a little further afield into neighboring provinces. There appears to be a interest and demand for the programming that we offer coast to coast to coast. And we're just trying to ensure that we're growing well, and that is a careful, inexact art science that we need to just make sure that we're intentional about, so that we don't lose the small shop feel, we don't lose that attention to trust building and to meaningful partnerships and lasting results, and that we're we're growing in a way that supports the communities, you know, the best that we can.
Thank you. Maybe just to give John a pause here for a quick little drink. John, take a breath. We've got another 15, 20 minutes here of questions
Okay, sure
for you.
thing.
So let's just take this all in a little bit. I'm appreciative.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to talk about these things. As you can probably tell, I can talk all day about this stuff. So
yeah, well, I appreciate it. I'm sure our audience here, we've got 76 people dialed in, probably even more, with
That's
small
awesome.
groups tuning in common rooms. I wanted to, I know Bonnie, maybe since you're a panelist, we could also connect your audio and video in a second, and you could ask your question directly to John and Cecily as well. If you had a question, we could also just take it right directly from you. But on that last point, John, before I turn it over, if Bonnie would like to jump in, you know, Elaine Cole's got a beautiful question here. You know, do you foresee Indigenous communities taking over the training programs in the future? Thinking about both the relationship building and the capacity and the scaling up that you just spoke about. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of model as well, as again, transferring some of these programs to be run by other communities, other First Nations themselves.
Sure. It's a good question, and I'd say as an organization, you know, we're sort of agnostic. We're open to what works for communities. My hunch is that the depth of this challenge and the need that is out there is such that there are, like, if at the community level, community members who have water science background, credentials, and experience aren't looking for work. They are employed. They are busy. They are in demand. And so what informs our approach, you know, broadly to this and includes a comment on this question, is that we're trying to loan capacity to communities, trying to loan the water science and education and training expertise that we have, so that hopefully one day, you know, an outside non-Indigenous organization taking a lead on the implementation of these programs isn't needed, right? And that I guess where we're, you know, what we see is that for that capacity that we bring to the table appears to be very much needed, and that there isn't a lot of idle water science capacity at the community level to take a program like this and implement it. You know, maybe, hopefully that day will come one day, and you know, but from what I'm hearing and what I see on the ground in our partnerships with Indigenous communities is that the capacity, the additional capacity that we bring to the table, regardless of our identity as non-Indigenous Canadians, is very much welcomed because it's a loan, and at the end of the day, it is with a sustainable, you know, sort of lasting results mentality. It is one where it is self-sustaining afterward, and the community certainly need that service less once the program is developed, and implemented. So it's yeah, we're agnostic. We'll see where it all goes. We kind of work just, you know, 1 or 2 years looking out at a time, because the change has been very, very significant. But at the end of the day, what is working best for communities and listening and engaging with our First Nations partners is definitely a big part of our guide.
I just wanted to welcome in Sister Bonnie Chesser up in North Bay. Bonnie's been a huge force for this Blue Communities project, not only as a steering committee member, but also as one of my drivers when I'm visiting the houses. Bonnie's been many hours on the road supporting this work and supporting my travel as well. And I know that all of us here today, all this 74 people signed in, and you know, can't access their video and are limited to just the chat box, just to keep things simple. But while we do have a few of us here on our panel here, I'd like to switch up the voices a little bit. And so over to you, Sister Bonnie, regarding your thoughts, reflections, questions for John.
Okay, just for clarification, I'm part of the North Bay community, but I live in Sudbury. This has been very informative, John. When I first saw the first videos about Water First, and from what you're saying today, I realized they do the testing. I thought they also had the opportunity to actually do some cleanup. So I have two things I wondered if you could comment on. When there's been an environmental disaster, we hear FEMA going in and being able to work with water that is contaminated and get it to a place where it can be drunk. I forget what FEMA stands for, the acronym. So that's one question about that. Would they ever, as they go on to further training these young people, be in a place where they could actually treat the water to make it drinkable? And my second question, though, when you mentioned the mercury, what is happening in terms of the government getting in there and cleaning up that? Is there a way to ever make that water drinkable again, or is it ruined forever?
Yes, those are good questions. I can comment on the first question briefly around just like those remediation efforts. So to actually sort of go in and clean up a damaged or compromised environmental site. We do some work around that. An example that comes to mind is with the Temagami First Nation. And it was a fish habitat restoration project where we expanded a spawning shoal, a walleye spawning shoal. And what had happened to the spawning shoal was, over the years of logging, fish eggs like to hatch in an oxygen-rich environment in between rocks. And so the fish will lay their eggs in the spaces in between these rocks. And they're successful at hatching where the rocks have a lot of water flowing over them, and there's lots of oxygen there then that supports those eggs. In Temagami, what happened was, after a very long period of time of logging and logs being sent down this river that was a chute and was actually modified to make the logs go quicker, to make more logs go down, and so on. But as a result, what happened was, over the years, the sedimentation, just like bits of log coming off, and bark and sediment and dirt and so on, started to fill those spaces in between the rocks. So that, and added to that was increasing pressure on the walleye populations in the Temagami region, from anglers, sport fishers, community use, and so on. And so that, they were observing a problem of fewer fish. And one of the ways that we supported the community to address this was identifying the spawning shoal, identifying some of the challenges with it. We bring in a fisheries biologist to complement our technical staff. And at the same time, it's the same sort of process. We hire and train locally. We hired a number of young Indigenous adults from the community of Temagami First Nation to work at the site alongside our staff and a fisheries biologist. And what they actually did was they took a fire hose. It's called a Wajax pump, but it's basically a lawnmower engine with a fire hose attached to it. And you blast the water on those rocks. You can actually put the hose right underneath the water, and with the river current behind you, it stirs up all the sediment, gets it out of those interstitial spaces, these spaces between the rocks where the eggs like to be. And it helps to sort of clean the spawning shoal. We then took a bunch of the rocks that were moved to make the river better for logging, and we put the rocks back into the spawning shoal where they were taken from. And at the end of the day, there's an example of a partnership and an environmental remediation project that was very much applied, hands-on, and within our approach of hiring and training locally. A really cool story from that was I wasn't there, but I was told by our staff afterward, an elder had come by in a boat and was inquiring as to what all these people were doing, half of whom weren't from the community and the other half were. And the elder asked, just like, what is happening here? What's going on? And one of our employees explained the context. And when she sped away in her boat prior to leaving, she said, well, this is really cool. This is reconciliation in action. And it was pretty terrific to hear about that, and to just be able to acknowledge that in some small way we can play a part in in this bigger question, and a lot of work that needs to be done between non-Indigenous Canadians and Indigenous communities here. So yeah, so that's an example of of an environmental remediation project. And I'm sorry, Sister Bonnie, there was a second part to your question. Would you mind refreshing me, please?
I asked about FEMA. whether they would eventually have the capacity as they went on for further training to do what FEMA does, is going in and taking contaminated water and making it drinkable. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very complex question and difficult, to be honest, to generalize on. Of course, every site is very different. Every contaminant has its own characteristics. Every kind of region has different environmental factors, and there needs to be a custom plan and a custom understanding of that space, of that site, of the contaminant, of the history, and so on. You know, so it's difficult to generalize, but at the end of the day, I think it's just really important, and I could briefly comment on our, you know, on our own engagement in that space, and it's through just our approach of education and training that helps the communities and the young Indigenous adults have the experience, the skills, and the credentials to undertake those site cleanups independently, and hopefully to avoid those site cleanups from happening, you know, from the mess happening in the first place. As I was saying to Paul earlier, to support communities to be able to participate in the environmental assessment process for future projects and so on from a strong position, and you know, that's certainly a part of what we're trying to support.
My other question was about the mercury cleanup.
Mm-hmm.
Is the government, what kind of headway are they making in getting that cleaned up, or can it ever be cleaned up?
Yeah, mercury. I'm not a mercury specialist. We do partner with one at the Carleton University. I have been, you know, I've been told that it's very difficult. The extent of the mercury contaminants in, you know, in the Grassy Narrows region was so comprehensive. It is a colossal project. Sometimes it's best to leave it there and to not stir it up, and to not, you know, just invite that it be further distributed through the environment. Sometimes it can be effectively removed. The scale of the mercury pollution in that region is just so colossal that I'm not sure what the best course of action is there. I know that a lot of money has been you know, dedicated to addressing it, and I'm honestly not that up to speed on the progress of the implementation there. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of promises, and I certainly hope it's underway in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Sister Bonnie and John, for that more in-depth looks. We are in our last couple of minutes here before we do a closing water ceremony. There's been a few, you know, we're seeing an unprecedented times here with the pandemic, and, you know, conversations regarding equity and investment, big investments in, you know, keeping things running. I guess at this time, you know, unlike maybe 2 years ago or even the last election, you know, what can a transformative form of advocacy look like when it comes to, you know, there's been some comments with the canceling of the Keystone XL pipeline and what to do with all those pipes, and people say use it to fresh water for First Nations reserves. John, in the small amount of time we have left, you know, there's a lot of Canadians here on the call today who are, you know, been living through this pandemic, have been seeing unprecedented amounts of money being spent by our governments to mitigate this pandemic. You know, mentioned a while ago that there's even some court actions happening with some First Nations taking the government to court. Based on your years in this issue and looking at the power structures, what are some effective ways in which Canadians on and off this call today can, you know, really, you know, put the pressure on the governments and our fellow citizens here to address this issue, even though it's over time, you know, just as soon as possible with and what kind of money would it take and what kind of commitments? So any thoughts or reflections on that? You know, many of us here have signed petitions. There's been Council of Canadians, as you know, has done work on this. And, you know, we've tried to vote for the right government, but, you know, all governments agree this is a critical issue. But we're living in these unprecedented times. I'm wondering if we could use the pandemic as a way to jump past many of these hurdles and actually fix this problem, and actually live up to the treaties and the sacred responsibilities and the international conventions and the inherent rights of First Nations across Canada. Any thoughts or reflections or advice on that as we move forward?
Sure. I think it's important to not let this this issue die. The drinking water in particular, to not stop at you know, the longer term boil water advisories. There are dozens, many dozens of short term boil water advisories that, as we were discussing earlier, are also unacceptable and need to be addressed. I would also you know, encourage a focus that is beyond just infrastructure. You know, functioning infrastructure is necessary to produce clean, safe, reliable drinking water, but it's not sufficient. People run water plants. They don't run themselves. They need to be operated, they need to be maintained, and they need to have skilled, credentialed, informed individuals who are doing that. So people run plants, and that is really important to underscore. You know, the work that we do as an organization is very much outside of that infrastructure space, which is the focus of the government. And I would suggest that some of the local capacity challenges that we engage with are going to be a thing for some time to come. So, and you know, from what we hear from communities, it's not just the infrastructure. There's challenges outside of that as well. I think it's really important also with a broader lens. That as interested Canadians, that we take the time to educate ourselves about the history. You know, one of my heroes is Gord Downey from the Tragically Hip, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago of brain cancer. But I remember he was saying at his last concert in Kingston, he shared the perspective that as Canadians, we've been trained our entire lives to ignore what is happening in Northern Indigenous communities. And I think that is true. And I think so to address that as individuals, I think it's incumbent upon us to educate ourselves. There's some really great books out there. I'm reading one, I brought it here, the 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. It's by Bob Joseph. It is a mind-blowing read and account of the Indian Act and the impacts it has on Indigenous communities historically and today. The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King is another incredible book that we all should read and to understand you know, some really important histories and perspectives on those histories between Indigenous communities, individuals, and the rest of Canada. So I think you know, educating ourselves. There are fantastic online courses right now that are being offered. There's one from Bob Joseph. There's another from the University of Calgary that are sort of, you know, the Indigenous relations and Indigenous cultural sensitivity trainings and so on. They're very informative, and I think it helps to have a big picture understanding of this space, which is so complex, but still just like trying to make some progress there, which then informs a lens on the water space. And you know, of course, where I'm focused, where Water First is focused, but it's very helpful to have that context in the background and that understanding of the histories that are deplorable and that are, you know, in dire need of a change in direction moving forward. So there's that, and you know, of course, as the ED of charity, I'd be remiss to not say donating to Water First. Our work is possible because of the donations that we receive. As I was saying, like it has developed, and our organization has developed such that these important programs that we run, we can now run with some independence and not sit them on a shelf for 18 months while we wait for, you know, a whole bunch of other things to line up that are beyond our control. And to donate to other organizations like Water First that in Canada have a mandate to support Indigenous communities here. There aren't enough civil society organizations with a mandate to support Indigenous communities here, and I think there should be more. So I think supporting those organizations that engage in this space is really critical too.
Thank you for that. It's a very complicated question and you did a great job. Did a great job with it. I'm going to turn it over to Sister Bonnie again for our closing water ceremony.
I would invite everybody to hold the water that you had as we began the ceremony. And I'm aware that we're so privileged that everybody here has safe drinking water. And as we know, many in Canada and throughout the world do not have this privilege. So it's something we shouldn't take for granted. In our opening of this event this morning, we blessed the water in our bowls or glasses as Sister Cecily read that lovely reflection. We heard this line, God's grace changes ice into the water of life. And we asked God to do the same for us. Before we invite you to drink this water, in a moment of silence, let us reflect on this line from the poem and make it our request. Oh God, melt the hardness, coldness, and fear within us, and transform us to be kind, warm, and loving, and help us to be advocates for those who need our voice. And all the people said, Amen. So let us gratefully drink our water.
Thank you, everyone. I hope today was both informative and experiential and had your questions answered. Wanted to thank the Blue Community Steering Committee for helping to organize this, Sister Nancy Sullivan for her work and introducing John today, and Water First as a whole, and John Millar in particular for their work as we collectively move forward on improving our relationship with water and First Nations across Canada through the lens of water. So good to see you all. Glad you could join today. Stay in touch with our website, and we'll be doing some more events throughout the year. So it's always weird signing off on these things, but that's how it is. So appreciate your time, everyone, and your patience and your questions. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.